Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Disability Tech Talk to commemorate National Disability Employment Awareness Month and ADHD Awareness Month. Disability is richly layered and deeply nuanced, and no two people will experience it in exactly the same way. I'm Jocelyn Cohen, and I'm the Vice President of Education with Cerebral Palsy Alliance Research Foundation, or CPARF for short. This event is closed caption enabled, and I've turned on transcription. It's being recorded, and we'll post it on our YouTube channel soon. For additional accessibility, I'll share a visual description of myself. I'm a white woman with dark brown shoulder-length hair that's down and brown eyes. I'm wearing large teal glasses and a striped shirt. There's a CPARF-related background behind me that has white and different hues of green. And sometimes I might look like my eyes are looking away from the screen or like they're rolling, but that's part of my cerebral palsy. In case this is your first online event with us, I'd like to tell you a bit about what CPARF does. Despite being the world's most common lifelong physical disability and affecting 18 million people worldwide, cerebral palsy is one of the most underfunded conditions. That's why CPARF funds research and technology that will positively change what it's like to live with cerebral palsy. On the scientific side, we're currently funding an array of projects that address cerebral palsy at all ages and stages of life. CPAR-funded research projects focus on chronic pain, technology, regenerative medicine, genomics, adulthood, and early detection and early intervention. The discoveries that researchers make today will make a difference for millions of people for generations to come. On the innovation front, we run Remarkable US, the US-based disability tech startup accelerator that's part of the global Remarkable Accelerator Program. And through seed funding, mentorships, deep dives, and support, we help startups bring affordable, life-changing technology one step closer to the people with disabilities who need it. Because the world isn't built for disabled people, but thankfully there are companies that place disability at the forefront, and Remarkable US is working with them. They're built to fill in gaps, meet crucial needs, and make accessibility affordable. And Leantime is one such company. Founder Gloria Folaron earned her bachelor's degree in registered nursing from the University of Arizona and then earned her MBA from North Central University before founding Leantime. I'm so glad to have you here, Gloria.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and your professional background?
Yeah, so you covered the high notes that come with a piece of paper. My background, I started my first career as a nurse. I worked everything from emergency medicine to procedural areas and even pediatric research. So I participated in the clinical side of studies for muscular dystrophy, and even allergy studies and just a different perspective there. And then I moved and transitioned my nursing career into startup project and product management, where I've worked on web applications, UX, UI, content, SEO, and first customer acquisitions.
That is a huge shift. So, what drew you to becoming a startup founder, specifically in the disability innovation space?
So some of that shift happened outside of what I'm doing in Leantime, but particularly what drew me to Leantime is even as a nurse, right? The natural inclination for why I was in nursing was about making a difference in individuals' lives on a one-to-one basis. What you can't do is scale that on a 12-hour floor shift. So you
Right.
can't make a bigger impact. And then at some point, as I'm working, this reality starts to show up over and over again that there are so many different ways of working, and there are so many different insights. And then 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with ADHD myself. And then my daughter was diagnosed autistic with ADHD. And all of a sudden, my entire life made sense. It was like looking at a piece of paper and seeing all these little check boxes I was marking off and being like, oh, everything makes sense now. And not knowing that I was constantly feeling like I was struggling in my ability to get things done, working harder than other people felt looked like they had to work, but
Mhm.
never really able to put a finger on why. And suddenly it made sense. And then I realized it's not just me. It's a huge other amount of people, with some recent statistics identifying as many as 53% of tech workers identifying as neurodivergent. And then the company is only identifying 3% of their employees as such. So this huge 50% gap of people who aren't getting the support that they need, and then the tools and the space still being built as if everyone thinks and processes information the same way.
It must take a lot more energy when you don't understand necessarily why your brain works the way it works or how it works that way. And I learned several years ago, I mean, it makes sense, but it took me a little while to learn that mental energy is energy. So how does that additional, cognitive load of not necessarily knowing why you process things a certain way, how does that affect the way you work and maybe even the way you perceive yourself? And then how did that change once you got that diagnosis?
Also, context switching is a great example. There's a lot of research that keeps popping up that if I have so many tabs open in my window and I click into a new tab, I could lose as much as 9 minutes in trying to get back to the original tab I was focusing on. And that 9 minutes adds up. And so cognitive, or the load that you're talking about, that mental work of having to find new ways to work, is not any different than the context switching. So what you've done is you've said, okay, I need to add in these additional layers, and my brain is processing it so quickly because that's how we survive. It's very instinctual when we're in groups and environments, and we have to accommodate those things. So, a great example, even today, I was in the middle of a conversation and I said something. And the moment I said it, I realized this could be interpreted as somebody taking it, uh, not personally, but like pushback.
Hmm.
And it wasn't intended to be pushback, but my neurodivergent life cycle so far has been that I have had to change and shift my language
Mhm.
because people will take feedback or comments as offenses or attacks or negativity when they're not intended to be as such. And I have to work around that. So now all of a sudden I went from having what I thought was a nice conversation to the load of, well, I just said this way, and now what was their reaction? And I'm processing their reaction, and then I'm looking at, okay, what did they reply? And then now do I need to filter in any additional information to accommodate what they just heard to make sure that the boat's not too rocked? And it's like, it's exhausting.
I was gonna say it sounds really tiring to keep all those juggle all those thoughts at the same time and then pick which one you're gonna catch and move forward within the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've talked uh, you know, about your experience and how did it shape Leantime?
So one of the things we didn't realize really early is that when I got into the tech startup space, it was through a startup weekend. And very early on, like navigating project management and navigating the startup world, startup community back then was really big on lean methodologies and using Kanban boards and sticky notes. Well, for someone who has ADHD, taking a pile of sticky notes and putting them on a wall doesn't necessarily help you identify, is this sticky note worth chasing?
Mhm.
Does this have enough background in it? Is it actually a priority? And then can I trace it to results or impact? All things that are motivating to someone who has ADHD.
Right.
And when I look back at it, I've always had a level of masking and drive of I'm going to accomplish things no matter what.
Mhm.
Does it always look like the way the world says it should look? Not probably not. But when I'm throwing things on a sticky note and I can't figure out why exactly it's not working the way everyone says it's supposed to work, it's because I shouldn't be throwing up a pile of sticky notes and call that a strategy.
Right. I mean, that resonates with me, the idea of getting things done in a way that is different than other people would expect and whether or not they think the result is what it should be. Like I get there in a crooked roundabout way, but I get there. So like what does it matter how I got there if we're both getting to that endpoint at the same time? Can you explain what lean methodology is? Because you mentioned that at the
Absolutely.
beginning and it's part of your name. So
And it's a a small part of what we look at when we're talking about the original lean methodology stems from Toyota manufacturing. It's where concepts like Kanban actually come from. And the original premise was how do we create an efficient work environment so that we decrease waste, so that status is transparent, and that everything is safe and flows in a process.
Okay.
So it's the systemization and waste elimination of a workflow. Works a little differently in manufacturing than it works in startup life. So
Sure.
they took concepts like that and put it into a startup methodology that was focused around very similar to business model canvas or a one-page business plan, which used to be like a 50-page document. Now it's a one page with like 9 blocks on it, and
Okay.
then filling out and answering those questions. And so it was how do you build a entire business based on a couple of blocks of conversation.
And it's really interesting because what was the percentage you said? 53%. There's
Yeah,
all these people and they're trying to shove them in this one narrow space.
that way.
And there's so many different ways to manage issues, manage projects. And so I think it's really great that um, Leantime exists to help people get where they need to be. That may not be the traditional path, the stickies on the wall or whatever someone is theoretically telling you need to do to get there. So there are lots of different project management tools in the landscape. Can you share some features that make Leantime stand out?
So I'll start kind of on our premise. I mentioned that lean sort of eliminate waste concept. When we think about eliminating waste or streamlining workflow, it's about how do we decrease that cognitive load. And then we think about user experience a bit more like being in a museum, or I'll take it back, more like being in an IKEA. And if you haven't been in an IKEA experience is that you go in and there's only one path, and you follow that path because IKEA has laid it out so well that you just instinctually go those directions.
Mhm.
And that's the way we see UX needing to be taken is that there should be some instinctual signals that tell you that this is the next step that you're supposed to be working on. The challenge in project management in particular is that it tends to be very broad-ended and ambiguous of here is a place to hold all your data. Now you're supposed to know how to put it in.
Mhm.
And the education and the training and the things that go behind project management are great and they're amazing fundamentals. But what we find is that people intuitively know how to accomplish things. And
Mhm.
they intuitively know how to make a to-do list and how to make plans and how to plan a trip across country and to accomplish their goals. So how do we now take something that we do intuitively and what we see other tools do is that they just create all of these places so you can house that and decide that flexibility in your ability to put it all in one place is what defines a PM tool.
Okay.
And where we're on the other side of things saying no, like the hardest part that we hear is getting started. If we take out the cognitive load of getting started and free you to really do your work, then you're winning because you can focus on that. And then we have the skill set, the AI, the behavioral science, the motivation modeling that then allows you to just do what you need to do. And so, in terms of what that looks like on a feature set, we started a functional cognitive accessibility of how do we simplify what project management looks like. So
Mhm.
it's that more intuitive experience. And then we build in these layers of features, and I'll talk to a couple that are coming that I'm really excited about.
Okay.
But stuff that's in the system right now is like our task sentiment. So you can rate how you feel on an emoji rating scale from red, swearing, angry face to an elated unicorn, those rare tasks you'd like to see more often.
Okay.
And what we do with that is that for someone who's got it, who has ADHD, it's like the last task you're going to work on is going to be the one you're dreading the most.
Sure.
And the thing we can do is we can look at how you feel about those activities and then pair them with activities that you like to do. So we can kind of an easier way to, I think this, it's eat the frog. We pair a hard task with a task that you like so that you stay in motion and it's easier to roll into because they have similarities in the work that they're about to do. But the next layer of that is that then we can actually make recommendations on who to assign tasks to begin with based on what they're interested in. So you're starting to build a ecosystem where you're able to make recommendations on interests and skill sets and who enjoys doing the work and still getting the privacy that you need since you don't necessarily want every manager to know that this task makes you want to bob an emoji, but it gives you the ability to then start looking at a team as a unit and find interest-based team development as opposed to I'm only going to give my engineer this task because his job title is an engineer and that's what he should do. Not all engineers are going to be productive working on things that they don't like to do.
Right. And I
And
mean, show me a team and there won't be a person on that team that doesn't have like there will always be someone on the team who hates some aspect of their job. Like everyone, you can rank everything you do in a day. There's always going to be something that's your least favorite thing. And so, like, even the manager, I mean, even if they don't like that someone ranked something low, I'm sure the manager has ranked something low too. And that maybe that even builds a camaraderie there of like, you kind of get to, you learn the work personality of your colleagues in a way that you wouldn't necessarily. Depending on the way that people interact with each other, I think.
oh, that's an interesting idea. So we haven't actually mapped that element out. Because what we've heard a lot is that psychological safety is rough. It is hard to make sure that you're in a psychologically safe environment. So there's been more of the how do we protect that transparency
Yeah.
and not expose people. But I would be thrilled if we find that more and more people are comfortable with those conversations because then you can build that, hey, Joe over here is really good in this thing that I can't stand. And I know that. So Joe gets to help work on that, and I can get to bear some of the weight of Joe's work
Yeah.
because I'm better at it. And that long in the long term is a great conversation to be able to have in terms of we're safe to even have those talks.
Yeah. And I think the emoji system, the rating system kind of splits the difference between those really detailed personality profiles, which I've taken at prior jobs, and just like not necessarily paying attention to what people's not only strengths are, but what their enthusiasm is behind. So some people have strengths, but they don't necessarily want to use those strengths in the workplace. Then they have enthusiasm behind other strengths, and then you'll have weaknesses, and the emojis kind of will help you bear that out without having to have an invasive conversation. But the thing I like about that system is that hopefully, I mean, I don't actually know what the gatekeeping is, but that hopefully it's reciprocal. That if your manager can see that, like, you have the really angry cursing emoji for a task, that you could see that they have um, that emoji for something else too.
Yeah, so we've looked at that from like a mood board perspective so that you could see the general mood of an organization. And not necessarily the intricate details, but you can say, hey, this is a rough week for everybody. Maybe we need to do something and have an intervention or engage in some sort of something that's more morale boosting or
Mhm.
lighten the load a little bit somewhere else. It definitely gives some better insights. One of the things I would call out to that too is that emojis are only so transparent and you called that out too in terms of talking about like the experiences of disabilities being so nuanced. Emotions have that layer of nuance as
Yeah.
well. And so where we start to really differentiate and build this out is what's coming for us, which is this what I call a neurodivergent motivation model. And
Okay.
so we're building out this framework that allows us to go a level deeper. So if you're having a really bad week and you still have to work on tasks that you don't like to do, like there's just going to be no way to avoid that.
Right. That's
So
universal.
yeah, it's It would be nice, but we can't eliminate that. And there's good reason for it, right? There's in terms of the science, especially for neurodivergent folks, there's this like Goldilocks range.
Mhm.
Something can't be too easy, something can't be too hard. And if it's
Just right.
one of those, you won't do it. It gets demotivating. There are a lot of things that suddenly go into it. And so as we build that out and shape that into a neurodivergent motivation model, it's looking at the whole picture. So I know how you feel about this, but hey, this task, we can now link back to these goals and to these outcomes, and this is your impact. And this is how you can create your own autonomy and have more control over this situation that you weren't able to have before.
And I can't imagine that, other project management systems have that level of nuance in them. And I think it goes back to, the conversation that we've been having. That nuance is really important. Everyone is multidimensional at a minimum. And, this Leantime product really seems to play to that strength. And you've talked a lot tonight about sort of ADHD as it applies to things, and we're right in the middle of Disability Employment Awareness Month. So, how do you think Leantime can shape the future of work for people with ADHD and other conditions and disabilities?
So this is, bear with me because this is going to sound a little out of left field, but I'm going to
Okay.
bring it back, I promise.
Okay.
Um, there are over 20,000 different species of bees in the world.
Oh,
And when people think about, see, told you, left field.
yeah.
Welcome to ADHD brain. This is it in full show. Um, with that many different species of bees, when people talk about bees, they often tend to think of honeybees only.
Sure.
Honeybees are a social type of bee. They work together, they have hierarchy, they live in hives. The reality, though, is that 90% of the bees that exist are solitary bees.
Oh,
They're not honeybees. They don't live in hives. They don't work in groups. They live on their own and they are amazing pollinators and they do what they need to do. And so a commentary around this is that, as an example, in India, there are 700 different types of bee species, 700. Only five of them are social bee types. So like the honeybees. So 695 bee species are solitary bees. What we live in right now is a world that is built for social bees. And the
mhm.
way we work is basically saying that all of our brains are supposed to fit in the way the social bees and honeybees are supposed to work, but
Literally
they're
hive mind.
exactly. And so what we end up seeing is that this idea of like, well, so let me step that back just a second. So, in where we are failing and where the bees have it better is that in the bee space, we call that species, but we don't say we have multiple species of humans.
Right.
We live in a deficit model. And so, if you are not a social bee, if you are not a honeybee in this model, you're broken. You're lazy. You're not productive. You're not working the way you're supposed to be. But in the bee model, that's the dominant bee. It is a beautiful bee. It is the thing that creates flowers and trees and creates our ecosystems. And we need that. And so the way I see Leantime, and so I said, I promised I was going to bring it
I
back.
knew I could tell once you started with the different species. I was like, I see where this is going. Yeah.
So the way I see Leantime in this space is how do we get to a place where all of those other brains now have the ability to get back their own ownership and autonomy in a space that has said, we've decided this is how it's going to be, and you have to work twice, three times, four times harder to prove yourself. We're creating a world where the goal is that you can work in the way you need to, set the schedule the way you need to, build and still have the results that you need to, and it doesn't have to look like the way all of the social bees work does.
I mean, that's fantastic. I'm excited about it. And it just I'm reminded of the team that I work with at CPARF. We're all very different people. We all have different strengths. We all have different ways of working and getting things done and collaborating and following up and all of that. And stuff gets done. And if we all worked in the same way, that would also just be so boring.
I've met quite a few people from your organization,
Yeah.
and you're all amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. But yeah, like it's boring when everyone works the same way and thinks the same way. The, I read somewhere that so many of the creatives in the world are have ADHD. That's not surprising to me. You're bouncing from idea to idea to idea to idea, as long as you can get them down somewhere, then you have like a plethora of things you've thought of. And then there are people who are methodical and help you bring those ideas to life. And I talk about this in relation to physical disability a lot, that in the CP space specifically, there's a lot of focus on, you know, making sure that you have, the ability to walk independently because the world is built for people who walk. It's just so much easier to get around if you walk. It's such a parallel. But so the emphasis is really placed on independence, independence, independence. And, through my adult years, I've realized that interdependence is the sweet spot because no one would ever want to truly be independent. We all need each other. You gave that example earlier of people taking on someone else's tasks because they really like that person's task and that person doesn't like that task, but they like what their coworker is doing and like it's solved. So who actually cares how it gets done if you've like collaborated in this barter or exchange to get it done? Interdependence is really where it's at. And it seems like Leantime really built on that.
I love that you call it interdependence because the way we look at things is like most PM tools are built for company work, and
Mhm.
it's built in this high level stakeholder. I've got people who need certain visibility model. But what makes a company is individuals. What makes a team are individuals. And if you don't have that collection of individuals where all of the parts are what contribute to the whole and the sum, like you don't have the sum anymore. It's
Right.
it's not the big picture. And so it's very neurodivergence in particular has a very gestalt approach to things, which the gestalt is that all you need all those little pieces to make a big picture. It's building a puzzle, and you can't see the beautiful picture that the puzzle builds if you don't have the piece in the middle that holds it all together.
Yeah. And it just is a big hole if you're missing that piece. You miss the picture and you get distracted by the hole in the middle. So
Yeah.
um I love this, and I'm wondering what you hope fellow neurodivergent folks will feel or experience when they use lean time.
So right now, and this is what we're really building towards. Productivity is we talk about productivity like it's the thing to do. Like the future of work is how productive we can be.
Mhm.
And what I find over and over again is that people are less interested in am I being productive? And they're more interested in have I made impact? And does what I do matter?
Mhm.
And what is the purpose? And how are the people around me engaged? And am I actually reaching any goals?
Right.
And as we look at work like that, we start looking more at the relationship we have with productivity. And so the experience long term that we're building towards is that I want folks who are neurodivergent to feel the reality that their feelings, their experiences, and their brains, they're valid. And it sounds silly because it's like, how does a software help someone manage their work and yet still feel like their experiences are valid? But it's tied so much to this core awareness that amounts to a bigger picture. And so we see our ability to start to pull those little pieces together and this modeling that we're building and some of these new features, which are like built around routine building, how to create us creating your projects for you, our goal alignment scores, and these clarity moments that we can create. And it's that shift from here's a productivity tool coaching you and saying, hey, get this done, into can we reframe how we think about the productivity?
Mhm. And reframe it in terms of impact, both for a person's individual goals, the team's goals, the organization's goals, and whatever other subgroups, so that there's meaning attached to what someone's doing. And so that, you know, going back to your story about, realizing you had ADHD late in life, I understand the idea of really feeling seen and feeling like you've found something to make your life easier. Like we should all be looking for and championing things that make our lives easier and shouting it from the rooftops so that if it would be helpful for someone else, they can make their life easier too. So I understand that there for sure. You alluded to a bunch of different features that are currently in the works for Leantime users. Are there any that you want to go into a little bit more detail about?
Yeah, so for example, one of the things that can be really challenging, you'll hear people say, oh, if you just do anything for 21 days, you can create a habit.
Mhm.
That doesn't work for most neurodivergent brains.
Okay.
Habits are less intuitive in the sense of how people typically talk about them as, oh, you just go and do this thing. I know every morning I should brush my teeth, but I have to tell myself I have to brush my teeth. I can't just get up and go brush my teeth. And so there is a concept called implementation intentions that's been well studied in the literature from multiple angles, from stroke, TBI, ADHD, and other forms of cognitive disabilities. And what they found is that if you can frame the thing you're about to try to accomplish in this structure, that it creates a level of automaticity. So it's a trigger that happens, and then that results in the brain having awareness of, oh, this happened, so I need to go do this.
Mhm.
So for me, that's when I get up in the morning, I like to call them routine as opposed to habits of when I go and brush my teeth. And if something throws me off that routine, toothbrushing is at risk. And so we have to figure out the ways around that. But so we're building this in there where it allows people to now create routines so that they'll be able to see what they're working on the next day and plan out the next day. And so what we find that most routine type features or habit features will
Mhm.
just give you, here is a habit tracker, write down that you did this.
Ah,
This is framed in the implementation intention structure and then has a prompting process that is going to be attached to our mobile app as well, that allows us to go from I want to do this or I'm going to track an activity to here's the actual steps I'm going to take. And it's the planning piece that we find in the literature that is what opens up actually accomplishing your goals.
it gives you the trigger points for the next layer of it, and it also attaches the impact that we've been talking about. So, like putting those two together, it makes a bigger, like leaves a bigger mental mark, I would think. Is that an accurate way to describe it?
Yeah, it's something that I didn't realize until I got into it that I was doing in nursing, especially when I was in the ER. You would
Mhm.
have a patient come in, complaint of sore throat, a complaint of chest pain, a complaint of migraines, and each of those patients would have an activity set that you would do every time that complaint came in.
Okay.
And there might be like small shifts here and there, but I knew every time I needed to set up IV therapy, I needed to set up for vital signs, I needed to set up for this medication, I needed to do this throat swab. And I could have all of those things in the room before the patient was even back into the room because there's this trigger followed by these steps that get accomplished. And it just makes things so much easier.
That kind of segues really nicely into my next question, which is as a founder with ADHD, how has lean time changed the way you approach tasks and how has it changed the way your day goes?
We have this conversation a lot in terms of there's a concept in startup life called dog fooding, where you eat your own dog food. And so you use the thing you're building
Mhm.
in order to identify the flaws and the gaps and the things. And there have been times where my technical half is like, if we can make you more productive in how these systems work, then we're on to something. Because like I, if the cognitive load is too high, the brain, the way the brain works with cognitive load and a concept called demand avoidance is that we're constantly evaluating, is the reward high enough for the amount of effort that's required for this? And if the effort is too high and the reward is too low, we don't do it, or we pick another item that is better matched. Or alternatively, if the effort is too low and the reward is eh, we still don't necessarily engage in those activities. So we go for the thing that fills the cognitive load of need, essentially, of where the reward or dopamine is. And so I've gotten really good because we're always talking about this of being able to identify, nope, cognitive load is too high. Cognitive load is too high. Well, now then I'm having to rethink what exactly do I need to do to overcome that cognitive load. And so this is the modeling that we're building is something that we're living as we're going through it, and then figuring out how does that translate into technology, and then how do we turn that into something that and maybe now would be a good time to throw it out there. We're looking for new beta testers, like a select group of folks who would love to give us feedback on these types of features, and creating a core group of that. So if folks were interested, would love to have people reach out. But it's that experience of we have to do these things. It's not just that high level knowledge that gets thrown into a system and we finger cross. It's that we're living it on a day to day.
That's really interesting insight, and I appreciate you sharing it. Like you're real, there's a phrase that people use sometimes that's like Superman's not coming, but you're your own Superman. Like you're literally saving your own day with the thing that you're creating. And I just think that's really cool.
I've never heard that, but I love that. And I would almost reframe it a little bit
Hmm.
because my daughter is 8
Hmm.
and she's autistic with ADHD, and she's brilliant and she thinks already very entrepreneurially and she wants to build businesses. But I remember what life was like growing up early in jobs and feeling misunderstood and people taking things incorrectly, and my productivity not looking like it was supposed to, and that hole. And so maybe Superman for me, but also that line of like when children turn 18. So there's this whole slew of folks who are getting diagnosed later in life
Yeah.
because we didn't think adults had ADHD. And we also didn't think that women had ADHD. So in the last like 4 years, all of a sudden people are getting diagnosed, but we're also seeing younger children now getting diagnosed and then running out of support at 18. They don't have programs, they don't have
Yeah.
things that help them once they get in the work environment.
There's a parallel with that in CP. It's the care cliff. You kind of fall off it. There's not coverage. There's not programs. Like depending on the insurance you have, it's 18 or 21, and then they throw you off the cliff.
Yep.
The metaphorical cliff, of course. Um, you said something that's interesting that people used to not think adults had ADHD. Was it that they they thought that people grew out of it, that it was a childhood thing, but it's a
Yep.
brain issue. Like it's in the brain.
Yeah. So I think it's a great example of what masking does. Like you have to work. You have to be able to feed yourself, or if you want to have a family and you want to have a career, 53% of tech workers identify as neurodivergent, but the companies see 3%. Like it is the same equivalency in terms of like they just assumed that they weren't in there. And the reason people didn't talk about it was because it's stigmatized.
Yeah.
Like I have friends who tell somebody they have ADHD and then their manager is micromanaging them because all of a sudden they're at a risk of not accomplishing their tasks.
And it's also ADHD is a real spectrum. and it affects people so differently. Um, so I have a former colleague who is probably the most creatively brilliant person I know. And she had a sign on her desk that said, "Oh, look, a chicken." And like you could see her brain switch thoughts all the time. And then she came up with the most brilliant things. And then I know other folks with ADHD where different qualities of that condition are more apparent than the constant switching and constant creative buzzing. And so it's also it's stigmatized because people think if they know one thing about it. First of all, it depending on who you are and how you frame things, it is or isn't a disability or a condition, whatever someone's comfortable with or whatever someone thinks applies to them. And then the person receiving the information, has whatever their perceptions are about ADHD based on who or what they've seen in regards to the condition. And they could just put everyone in the bucket of whatever their image is of the condition. And that's another parallel with physical disabilities as well. So you're just making me think a lot tonight, and I appreciate that. I see two comments in the chat I just want to highlight. Amber said there's a strong genetic link to ADD, ADHD. And then our good friend Morgan, who's a devoted Tech Talk and webinar attendee, said, I would hope that Leantime helps shake the stigma in business. Places like HR would allow employees to make their work personal. It's a safety and privacy issue, but this gives the individual the power to say, I have a tool to apply to my workload.
And I would say I that's where we want to be. I think the question for us in the long run is the world ready for some of that conversation? And so we're wanting to make sure that we're able to teeter the line between essentially the benefit of the curve effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is how do we make sure that when we support the folks who are the most challenged in this area, that it's ultimately benefiting other folks as well. And in doing that, normalizing the experience, normalizing the conversation. So instead of that separation that tends to occur.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about this a bit. Are there other, folks you think could benefit? Basically, everyone I think could benefit from a system like this. Would you agree, or would you have any kind of caveats?
At the moment, I don't have any caveats with where we're going. Where I really want to see us long term is stepping even more into the cognitive accessibility space. So making what I've heard over and over again is for folks with mobility or who use and even conversations I've had with other folks with CP where they're using voice to speech, but then have mobility challenges. Like the systems aren't accessible even in the other tools. They're not built to be able to handle some of the talk to speech. They're not built talk to text. They're not built for some of the mobility shifts and keyboard shortcuts and things like that. So those are things that we're still working on and are prioritizing as part of the wholeness of cognitive accessibility, not just the one elements or pieces of it. We want to make sure that that's accessible across the board.
Yeah, because disability is such a wide umbrella. That means accessibility is equally as wide. And while it's likely impossible to ever be accessible to every single person with every single condition, the more that people work and get to more concentric circles, wider and wider and wider, the closer everything gets to universal design, and the better off everybody is. It's the curb cut effect, like you said. That was created for wheelchair users, and anyone with any wheeled stuff or with a balance issue or what have you uses those. And I don't know how any traveler would deal with themselves if those didn't exist.
Yeah.
So hopefully people will be able to take advantage of this across the disability spectrum and in the non-disabled space as well. Um, so we have a little bit of time left. What do you want fellow innovators in the disability space to know about Leantime?
When you say innovators, are we talking about folks who are wanting to build products in the disability sector?
Yeah, people who'd want to build products or maybe have an idea and like they're not the person that would want to build it, but they might want to start a company.
One of the things that I wake up and I constantly ask myself is, if not me, then who?
Mm,
And that I think, lean time aside, if somebody has got something that they see a hole that needs to be filled, and they have the capacity, because we talk about energy, right? Like
yes.
you need to be mindful of capacity and energy and what what space you have. There are so many different ways to work around and find the support that absolutely should go for it. If it includes lean time, I would love that, because then we get to be part of that journey, and that's part of what we see. Some of the statistics we didn't talk about, or a recent number was 63% of small business owners have ADHD, or some
Wow.
other form of neurodivergence. And it makes sense in terms of a lot of the things and points you called out. And so
Yep.
if we can be part of that journey and support it in any way, I would, that's amazing to me, because we want to be part of that growth. Um, Adding lastly into that, what you all are doing in terms of CPARF and being part of the Remarkable Tech Accelerator, which we didn't touch on during this conversation. But we just wrapped up being part of the US cohort,
Mhm.
and that the program that you all have created and the investments and money that you're putting into those programs and those companies is absolutely incredible. So it's definitely, resources are out there and they're growing. And so that the world is changing and making more room and more awareness ready for what that's doing.
I think one of the greatest things about Remarkable, because this was now the third cohort, is the bonds that I see and hear about from Molly, who runs the cohort, between all the founders and the companies, and like that you learn unexpected things from each other, and everyone has such great things that they're working on, and I just love that idea of that. Again, it's like an unexpected interdependence and an unexpected learning experience on top of the things you might have expected to get out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you had such a great experience. I appreciate you saying that. Kind of related things. What do you hope the next year brings for you in lean time, and what do you hope your impact will be?
So what I see for our coming future is that we're getting ready to open up a fundraise round so that we can start building more and more of these features around that neurodivergent motivation model. And from that, what I start to see is that we start to create a space that is as much community driven as it is as us driven. So that this is a community and ecosystem and people product, and not just here's a organization that's telling you how you should be motivated. So that goes back to that, like those cohorts of folks who are interested in giving their experiences and their time in those features. And then also getting into larger organizations. So the enterprise level, we're international already and we're translated in over 40 languages.
Oh, wow.
So
Congrats.
the thanks,
Yeah.
the community space, even in Europe already is focused. There's a ESG shift going on, tracking disabilities and benefits, and organizations needing to report back into that. So we definitely see ourselves being part of that journey of making it easier for organizations to become more inclusive and accessible.
That is so fantastic. Um, what does lean time cost for individual users, or do you envision it, are the costs paid by, the companies that sign on? How does that work?
So we're in the process of mapping out a new pricing model, so that may change in the next few months.
Okay.
What we currently offer is we have an open source model, which allows somebody to self-host our platform and then buy plugins that level up features. So there's a pricing model for the plugins, and then our SaaS version, which ranges from $4 to $10 per user, depending on what you're looking for feature-wise. We find that price is also a component of cognitive accessibility, though. And so, as we look at what exists in the space on how these tools are typically priced, they are not very accessible. It's like feature picking and trying to read through I don't know, read stones through running water. It's not easy to figure out what the features are what you're getting for which price tag.
Right.
And so we see changing that and simplifying that into a single price range, especially as we get these next level of neurodivergent support features out.
That sounds exciting. And where can people go to find out more about Leantime?
So our website, which is Leantime, that's Leantime.io.
Okay.
And then I'm always accessible on LinkedIn, which would be my name, Gloria Folaron on LinkedIn. And then an email is always welcome to us, which is support@leantime.io.
Fantastic. Is there anything else we didn't cover tonight that you'd like other folks to know?
Um, I, I don't know why that question suddenly got me off guard.
That's okay.
Um, no, I think we covered so many things. I think I just want to say I appreciate everything CPARF is doing and the time that you've taken and even the remarkable experience. It's been a when you see a world that you want to create, finding the other folks who are also heading in that direction can be hard when you like live in a little remote bubble
Mhm.
sometimes.
Yeah.
And so the experiences I've had getting to know you and getting to know from Molly and the other CPAR folks has been incredible and inspiring. So that element of like impact and how are things relevant to me, you all have also gifted back to me. So I just want to say I appreciate that.
Well, it's just a mutual admiration society over here, honestly. And yeah, Morgan was saying that the remarkable experience gets people to you all too through the remarkable roundtables probably and you get to have those discussions and then people get to learn about what you're doing and it's really exciting for the disability communities. It's a real again, it's that interdependence piece that we were talking about earlier. Everything always circles back. We start with bees, we land on the thing we wanted to talk about, we circle back to everything. So thank you so much, Gloria, and thanks to everyone who joined us tonight. Please make sure to keep an eye on your inbox for more upcoming programs and ways to make a difference. You can also learn more about Gloria and our other remarkable US founders on our Changing What's Possible podcast. New episodes are out every Friday, and Gloria's has been out for a while, so you can check that out. They cover assistive technology as well as cerebral palsy research. And we'll keep covering those things for several more episodes this season. We can only do this important work because of people like you, and your support means so much to us. You can donate at cparf.org or head to 3 4CP, that's the number 3, FORCP.org, if you're interested in getting more involved in fundraising for us. We hope you'll give, follow, listen, and learn how we're bringing science and tech to life to change what's possible and make accessibility accessible. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.
Thank you.